My mother-in-law tried to ruin my wedding behind my back, so I removed her from my future without saying a word. The last 3 weeks before my wedding to Daniel were a blur of finalized details, last-minute adjustments, and that peculiar mix of excitement and anxiety that comes with planning the most important day of your life. The venue was secured, a breathtaking lakeside estate with gardens that would be in full bloom by our May wedding date. The catering menu had been perfected after countless tastings. My dress, an off-shoulder lace creation that made me feel like the best version of myself, hung protected in my closet after its final fitting. Everything was falling perfectly into place. Too perfectly, perhaps. That's what kept me awake at night. Not the typical pre-wedding jitters, but an unsettling feeling that something wasn't quite right. The source of my unease had a name. Janet, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. Sweetheart, don't worry about the seating chart. I've got it all handled, Janet had insisted last week, her voice dripping with helpfulness as she'd practically snatched the papers from my hands. You've got enough on your plate already. At first, I'd been grateful. Janet had been somewhat cold when Daniel and I first got engaged, polite but distant, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. So when she suddenly transformed into wedding planning fairy godmother about 2 months ago, I'd been relieved. Finally, I thought she was accepting me into the family. But now, as I sat at our kitchen island scrolling through RSVPs on my laptop, that nagging feeling returned. Something about her newfound enthusiasm felt calculated. Daniel? I called out to my fiancé, who was engrossed in a basketball game in the living room. Has your mom always been this involved in planning things? He appeared in the doorway, beer in hand, looking thoughtful. Not really. Dad usually handled the social calendar stuff. Why? I shrugged, not wanting to sound paranoid. Just curious. She's been so helpful lately. Daniel smiled, the kind of warm, genuine smile that had made me fall for him 3 years ago. She's probably just excited. You know, her only son getting married and all that. I nodded, but the unease persisted. It wasn't just Janet's sudden helpfulness that bothered me. It was the way certain names kept dropping into our conversations. One name in particular, Alina. Remember when Alina made that amazing chocolate souffle for Christmas? Janet had reminisced last Sunday during our family dinner. Alina always had such elegant taste in centerpieces, she'd commented while reviewing our flower arrangements. Alina used to say the most important thing about wedding music is that it should tell your love story, she'd mused while we finalized the DJ's playlist. Each mention was casual, almost throwaway, but frequent enough to form a pattern. And each time, I'd notice a flicker of discomfort cross Daniel's face before he quickly changed the subject. I knew about Alina, of course. Daniel and I had had the ex-talk early in our relationship, as most couples do. She was his college sweetheart, the relationship that had lasted nearly 4 years before imploding spectacularly in their mid-20s. He didn't share many details, just that the breakup had been messy and toxic, and that they hadn't spoken in years. I never pushed for more. We all have pasts we'd rather not relive. But Janet's constant references to her made me increasingly uncomfortable. It was as if she was keeping Alina's ghost hovering over our wedding preparations, a persistent shadow that I couldn't quite shake off. I closed my laptop with a sigh. Tomorrow would be our final meeting with the wedding planner, and I needed to be focused, not distracted by my strange intuition about my future mother-in-law. As I headed to bed, my phone pinged with a text from Janet. Just confirmed that lovely little detail we discussed. It'll be such a wonderful surprise for Daniel. I stared at the message, my brow furrowing. What detail? What surprise? I had no recollection of discussing any surprise for Daniel with Janet. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on a non-committal. Thanks, Janet. Looking forward to seeing you at the planner meeting tomorrow. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned beside Daniel, my mind racing with possibilities. Was I being paranoid? Was this just normal wedding stress making me overthink everything? Or was there actually something off about Janet's sudden involvement? The next morning, I arrived at the wedding planner's office 10 minutes early, hoping for a few moments alone with Melissa, our coordinator, before Janet arrived. Luck was on my side. Melissa was already there, arranging sample place settings for our final approval. Melissa, I began hesitantly. Has my future mother-in-law contacted you directly about any surprises for the wedding? Melissa looked up, a small frown creasing her forehead. Not that I can recall. Everything's gone through you, or been discussed with both of you present. Why do you ask? I was about to explain when Janet swept in, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than our entire flower budget, her perfect blonde bob not moving an inch as she air-kissed my cheeks. There's my beautiful daughter-to-be, she exclaimed with theatrical affection. And Melissa, lovely as always. Shall we get started? I've had some thoughts about the reception entrance. The meeting progressed normally, but I watched Janet carefully. She was charming, articulate, and full of suggestions that were actually quite good. Yet there was something performative about her enthusiasm, as if she was playing the role of supportive mother-in-law rather than genuinely being one. As we reviewed the final guest count, Janet pulled out her phone. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, there might be one last addition. An old family friend just RSVP'd that they can make it after all. I hope that's not too late to accommodate. Melissa glanced at me. We're pretty tight on numbers, but we could probably squeeze in one more. What's the name? My stomach tightened as Janet smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her cool blue eyes. Alina Simmons. Such a dear. I've known her since she was a child. The name hung in the air between us. I kept my face neutral, but inside, alarm bells were ringing at full volume. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't innocent. This was deliberate. Actually, I said, matching Janet's false sweetness with my own, I need to discuss any additions with Daniel first. We're really trying to keep numbers under control. Janet's smile flickered just slightly. Of course, dear. I just thought since she's practically family. We'll see, I replied, already knowing exactly what I would do. As the meeting wrapped up and Janet excused herself to use the restroom, Melissa leaned close to me. Everything okay? You seem tense. I hesitated only briefly before whispering, keep me informed if Janet contacts you about any changes or additions to our plans. Directly to me, not through Daniel or anyone else. It's important. Melissa nodded, her expression professional, but understanding. Absolutely. Your wedding, your rules. As I walked to my car afterward, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. How'd it go with Mom and Melissa? I stared at the screen, uncertain how to respond. Should I tell him about Alina? About my suspicions?
No, not yet.
Not until I knew exactly what Janet was planning.
Great.
I typed back. Everything's on track. I'll tell you all about it tonight. But as I started my car, that gut feeling I'd been having for weeks solidified into certainty. Janet was up to something, and it had everything to do with Alina. The question was, how far was she willing to go to sabotage our wedding? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my engagement ring catching the sunlight. One thing was certain. Nobody, not even my future mother-in-law, was going to ruin the day I'd been dreaming of. I just needed to figure out exactly what I was up against. The week before our wedding arrived with a flurry of final preparations. Friends and family were flying in, welcome bags needed assembling, and somehow I still had to find time to finish packing for our honeymoon in Bali. Through it all, Janet maintained her newfound helpfulness, swooping in to handle minor details that somehow always seemed to put her at the center of our wedding planning. I've taken care of the final guest list, Janet announced on Thursday evening, breezing into our apartment with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Daniel was out with his groomsmen for a final tuxedo fitting, leaving me alone to deal with his mother. You've got enough stress, darling. Let me handle this part. She pulled out a meticulously organized spreadsheet, color-coded, alphabetized, with neat annotations about dietary restrictions and plus ones. I had to admit, it was impressively thorough. Janet had always been efficient, a trait that made her successful in her executive position, but sometimes difficult as a future mother-in-law. I've confirmed everyone's attendance and made the final adjustments, she continued, sliding the papers toward me. The venue needs this by tomorrow morning. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciative despite my reservations. I'll review it tonight. Janet's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's nothing to review, dear. It's all taken care of." Something in her tone made me insist. "I'll still look it over, just to be sure." That evening, after a quick dinner of takeout Thai food, I sat at our dining table and began scanning the guest list. Janet's work was indeed immaculate, every name accompanied by their relationship to us, their meal choice, their seating assignment. But as I flipped to the third page, a name jumped out as if it had been printed in neon. Alina Simmons, family friend, table 7. My stomach dropped. Table 7. That was one of the closest tables to the head table, where Daniel and I would be sitting. A prime position for catching the groom's eye throughout the reception. I grabbed my phone and texted Janet, trying to keep my tone casual. "Hi Janet, noticed Alina Simmons on the guest list." "Who is she again?" The reply came almost too quickly. "Oh, she's just an old family friend. You've never met her. She's been abroad for years, but is back in town." The casual dismissal made my hand shake. I knew exactly who Alina was. Not from meeting her, but from the few photos I'd seen on old social media posts that Daniel had forgotten to scrub when we started dating. Alina with her perfect honey blonde hair and wide green eyes. Alina wrapped around Daniel at a college formal, both of them looking impossibly young and in love. Alina, who had apparently made his life hell toward the end of their relationship. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to call Daniel immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed Alina Simmons into the search bar. Her social media profiles appeared instantly. She hadn't exactly been abroad for years. According to her Instagram, she'd been living just 40 minutes away in the neighboring city, working as an interior designer and posting artfully composed photos of minimalist apartments and weekend brunch outings. Her most recent post, dated just 3 days ago, made my blood run cold. A photo of a sleek black dress hanging against a white wall, captioned only with a champagne glass emoji and the date of our wedding. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned. I picked up my phone again, this time calling Janet directly. "Hello, dear," she answered, her voice sugary sweet. "Did you review the guest list?" "Perfect, isn't it?" "Janet," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I know who Alina is." A pause. "I don't know what you mean." "She's Daniel's ex-girlfriend. The one he dated for 4 years in college." "Oh," Janet exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "That Alina? Goodness, I completely forgot they had that little romance. It was so long ago." The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh. "Why is she invited to our wedding?" Janet sighed, switching tactics. "Look, Sophie, the Simmons family has been close to ours for decades. It would be rude not to include her. Besides, Daniel and Alina are ancient history. They were practically children when they dated." I bit back the words that threatened to spill out. That Daniel had been 26 when they finally broke up, hardly a child. That their relationship had been serious enough that he still occasionally had nightmares about their toxic ending. Instead, I simply said, "I see. Well, thank you for explaining. I'll talk to Daniel about it." "Oh, don't bother him with guest list minutiae," Janet replied quickly. "He trusts us to handle these details." After hanging up, I sat motionless at the table, staring at the name on the list. Janet was lying. This wasn't about family connections or social obligations. This was deliberate, a calculated attempt to bring Daniel's ex back into his life on our wedding day.
But why?
What could Janet possibly hope to accomplish? Whatever her reasons, one thing was clear. I needed to investigate further. And I needed to do it without tipping my hand. Sleep eluded me that night. Daniel returned late from his fitting and celebratory drinks with the groomsmen, slipping into bed with a whispered apology and the faint scent of whiskey. I pretended to be asleep, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask him. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely. Carefully extracting myself from Daniel's embrace, I padded to our home office. The blue light of my laptop screen illuminated the darkness as I opened it, determined to find answers. Janet had been managing the RSVPs through the Addams family email account, a shared Gmail that Daniel had given her access to for wedding planning purposes. It was meant to keep all the wedding correspondence in one place, separate from our personal emails. Daniel rarely checked it, trusting his mother and me to handle the details. I knew the password, of course. I'd used the account dozens of times to send updates to vendors and respond to guests. But tonight, I wasn't looking for RSVPs or catering confirmations. I was looking for evidence. The main inbox appeared normal, organized into folders for vendors, family RSVPs, and miscellaneous wedding matters. Janet's methodical nature was evident in the careful labeling system, but something felt off. If Janet had been communicating with Alina, where were those emails? I clicked through every folder, scanning subject lines and sender names. Nothing from or about Alina Simmons. Maybe I was overreacting after all. Maybe Janet really had just included her without realizing. Then I noticed it. A folder I hadn't created, labeled simply Archives. It sat at the bottom of the folder list, easy to overlook. Inside were what appeared to be old family emails, dating back several years. Why would Janet archive these in our wedding account? I was about to close it when a subfolder caught my eye. Yes. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. Inside was a single email thread between Janet and an address I didn't recognize, Alina, simmons28@gmail.com. The most recent message had been sent just 3 days ago, the same day as Alina's cryptic Instagram post. With trembling fingers, I clicked to open it. From Janet Adams to Alina Simmons subject, your invitation. Alina dear, everything is arranged. You'll be seated at table 7, which has perfect visibility to the head table. Daniel won't know you're coming until he sees you. I've made sure of that. You still have time to fix this.
I know he still cares about you. Just come.
Make him remember. The bouquet toss will be at 9:30. Be ready. That's your moment. Call me when you get this. Janet. Below it was Alina's reply. Janet, are you sure about this? Daniel made his choice pretty clear when he left. I don't want to cause a scene. Alina. And Janet's response. Trust me, I've watched them together for 3 years. It's not the same. She'll never understand him like you do. He's settling, and he knows it. He just needs a reminder of what real love feels like. This is your last chance. Our last chance. After Saturday, it will be too late. I read the exchange 3 times, each time feeling the betrayal cut deeper. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely close the laptop. I sat in the darkness, the weight of Janet's deception crushing my chest. It wasn't just an innocent invitation. It wasn't even just a misguided attempt to reconnect old friends. This was a calculated plan to sabotage my wedding, to make Daniel doubt his choice, to create chaos on what should be the happiest day of our lives. Our last chance, she had written, as if she and Alina were conspirators in rescuing Daniel from a terrible mistake. From me. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to wake Daniel and show him the evidence of his mother's betrayal. I wanted to call Janet and demand an explanation. I wanted to cancel the whole wedding and elope somewhere far away from this toxic family drama. But as the initial shock subsided, something else replaced it. Cold, clear determination. Janet thought she was clever. She thought she could manipulate us, play puppet master to our lives. She had deliberately tried to hurt me, to undermine my relationship, to destroy my wedding day. And she had failed. Because now I knew, and knowledge was power. I wiped my tears away, a plan already forming in my mind. I would not confront Janet, not yet. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt or angry. I would not allow her to paint me as the hysterical, paranoid bride. Instead, I would be methodical.
Strategic.
I would dismantle her plan piece by piece, without her even realizing what was happening until it was too late. I glanced at the clock. 3:42 a.m. In less than 72 hours, I would be walking down the aisle to marry Daniel. Between now and then, I had work to do. Quietly, I crept back to bed. As I slid under the covers, Daniel stirred slightly. "Everything okay?" he murmured sleepily. I kissed his forehead gently. "Everything's fine," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." And for the first time since discovering Alina's name on the guest list, I truly believed it would be. Janet had underestimated me. She thought I was weak, easily manipulated. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight and a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel had already left for a breakfast with his father and brother, a tradition they'd planned months ago. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen island, opening a fresh notebook. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days to execute a plan that would neutralize Janet's sabotage without creating additional drama. I needed to be surgical in my approach, precise, controlled, and completely undetectable. Step 1. Secure the guest list. I called Melissa, our wedding planner, before 8 a.m. Sophie, everything okay? Her voice was concerned. Early morning calls from brides rarely brought good news. I need to make some changes to the final guest list, I said calmly. And I need your absolute discretion. A brief pause. Of course. What changes are we making? There's a name, Alina Simmons. She needs to be removed. Immediately. And under no circumstances should Janet Adams be informed of this change. To Melissa's credit, she didn't ask questions. Consider it done. Anything else?
Yes.
I need you to send me the master copies of all wedding documents, seating charts, place cards, everything. And from this point forward, any changes requested by Janet need to come through me first.
Can you do that?
Absolutely, Melissa replied, her tone professional but curious. Sophie, I don't want to pry, but is everything all right with you and Janet? I hesitated only briefly. Let's just say there's been a misunderstanding about who's in charge of this wedding. And it's me. After hanging up, I moved to step 2, secure the perimeter. I contacted the venue coordinator, the catering manager, the photography team, and the DJ. Each conversation followed the same script, polite but firm instructions that any last-minute changes needed my direct approval, regardless of who requested them. I created a password system with each vendor, ensuring no one could override my decisions without it. The DJ sounded confused when I specifically instructed him to ignore any requests for changes to the reception timeline, particularly around 9:30 p.m. Is there something I should know about? He asked. Just ensuring our perfect day stays perfect, I replied sweetly. Step 3 was the most delicate. Remove Alina's access without alerting her. This required careful consideration. If I simply uninvited her, she might contact Janet, who would then have time to create a new plan. Instead, I needed Alina to believe she was still coming until it was too late. I logged back into the family email account and created a new email address that looked nearly identical to Janet's, changing just one character. From this address, I composed a carefully worded message to Alina. Alina, there's been a slight change of plans. The couple has decided on a more intimate ceremony and reception than originally planned. To avoid any awkwardness, I think it's best if you don't attend after all. Daniel is in a fragile state these days, wedding stress and all, and seeing you might complicate things. I'll reach out after they return from the honeymoon to arrange a more appropriate reunion. Please don't reply to this email, as I'm overwhelmed with wedding details. And please don't mention this change to anyone. We're trying to keep the downsizing quiet to avoid hurting feelings.
Janet.
I read it twice before sending. The tone mimicked Janet's perfectly, condescending, conspiratorial, and manipulative. I had no doubt Alina would believe it came from her. Step 4. Create a contingency plan. Even with all my precautions, I needed to prepare for the possibility that Janet might find another way to cause trouble or that Alina might show up anyway. I called Daniel's best man, Chris, who had been his roommate during the worst of the Alina years. Chris, I need a favor, I said after swearing him to secrecy. And it's going to sound strange. By the time I explained the situation, showing him screenshots of the emails I discovered, Chris was fully on board. That's messed up, he muttered. Count me in. I'll have the groomsmen on alert. If Alina shows her face, she won't get within 50 feet of Daniel. The final step was the hardest. Act normal. When Janet called that afternoon to discuss last-minute details, I answered with the same friendly tone I always used. I agreed with her suggestions about the cocktail hour music. I laughed at her joke about Daniel's father's dancing. I thanked her for handling the guest list so beautifully. Not once did I let on that I knew what she'd done. Not once did I give her reason to suspect that her carefully laid plan was being dismantled piece by piece. That evening, when Daniel asked if everything was ready for the big day, I smiled and assured him it was all under control. "You seem different," he observed, studying my face. "More, I don't know, confident." I kissed him lightly, just excited to be your wife. As I fell asleep that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. Janet had tried to turn my wedding day into a trap. Instead, she'd walked right into one of my making. The beauty of it was its simplicity. I hadn't needed to scream or fight or create a scene. I'd simply removed her power, quietly and completely. And she had no idea what was coming. The day of our wedding dawned with perfect blue skies and a gentle May breeze, the kind of weather every bride dreams about. As I sat in the bridal suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids and the gentle chaos of hairstylists and makeup artists, I felt strangely serene. While they chattered excitedly around me, I was focused on the satisfaction of knowing my plan was working flawlessly. "Your mother-in-law is here," my maid of honor, Lily, announced, peeking through the door. "Should I send her in?" I nodded, watching my reflection in the mirror as the makeup artist applied the finishing touches to my lips. "Absolutely." Janet entered in a cloud of expensive perfume and pale blue silk, her custom-made dress a perfect complement to our color scheme. Her smile was wide, her eyes calculating as they swept over me. "Sophie, darling, you look absolutely breathtaking." She air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to disturb my makeup. "Everything is going according to plan. The venue looks magnificent, the flowers are divine, and all the guests are being seated as we speak." I noticed the slight emphasis on all the guests and suppressed a smile. Let her think her scheme was still intact. "Thank you, Janet," I replied warmly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Her expression softened, almost genuine in its pleasure at my gratitude. For a fleeting moment, I wondered how different things might have been if she had simply accepted me from the beginning, if she hadn't been so determined to replace me with Alina. But that moment passed quickly. "Is there anything else you need before the ceremony?" she asked. I shook my head. "Everything's perfect." "Well then, I'll go check on Daniel. That boy is probably a nervous wreck without me." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Oh, Janet, I approved your toast for the reception. Right after the best man's speech, just as you wanted." Her smile widened. "Wonderful. I've been practicing for weeks." "I bet you have," I thought, watching her retreat from the room. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed it would be. Walking down the aisle toward Daniel, seeing his eyes fill with tears as he caught sight of me in my dress, speaking our vows with voices that trembled with emotion, these moments were untainted by Janet's scheming. They were ours alone. Throughout the ceremony, I caught glimpses of Janet in the front row, her expression a careful mask of maternal pride. She kept glancing toward the back of the venue, clearly expecting to see Alina slip in at any moment. The growing confusion on her face as the ceremony progressed without interruption was its own small reward. By the time we moved to the reception, Janet's composure was beginning to crack. I watched from across the room as she checked her phone repeatedly, her brow furrowing deeper each time. When she approached the catering manager and engaged in what appeared to be a heated, whispered conversation, I knew she was discovering that her carefully placed landmines had been disarmed one by one. The reception unfolded beautifully. First dances, delicious food, heartfelt toasts from my father and Daniel's best friend. The atmosphere was joyful, relaxed, exactly what we had hoped for. And as 9:30 approached, the time Janet had designated for Alina's grand moment, I watched my mother-in-law grow increasingly agitated. Finally, it was time for Janet's toast. The DJ announced her name, and she made her way to the microphone, champagne glass in hand. She had regained her composure, her smile fixed firmly in place as she faced the gathered guests. "When Daniel was a little boy," she began, her voice warm with rehearsed emotion, "I used to imagine the woman he would one day marry. I pictured someone who would complement him perfectly, who would understand his sensitive soul the way only a mother could." She paused, her eyes scanning the room before continuing. Family means everything to the Adams. We believe in deep connections, in relationships that stand the test of time. Some people are simply meant to be in our lives forever. I recognized the subtle message within her words, the emphasis on history, on deep connections that new relationships couldn't match. This was meant to be the preamble to Alina's moment, setting the stage for doubt and second thoughts. When Janet finished her carefully calibrated speech, the room applauded politely. She smiled triumphantly, her eyes once again searching the crowd for Alina, the guest who would never arrive. As the applause died down, I stood up and stepped forward, taking the microphone from her surprised hands. "I'd like to say something too, if I may," I said, my voice steady and clear. The room fell silent. This wasn't on the program. Janet's expression froze somewhere between confusion and alarm. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate our love. Every person in this room was carefully chosen to share this moment with us." I paused, my eyes meeting Janet's. "And to those who weren't invited back after their intentions were exposed, this wedding is not a stage for past mistakes to return. Some people try to rewrite the future by clinging to the past. But today, we choose to move forward, with or without them." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Most guests wouldn't understand the full meaning of my words, but the message to Janet was unmistakable. Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd known her, Janet Adams was speechless, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. Daniel reached for my hand, confusion evident on his face. "Sophie, what's going on?" I smiled at him, squeezing his fingers gently. "I'll explain everything later. For now, let's dance." As I led my new husband to the dance floor, I caught a glimpse of Janet slipping out of the reception hall, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt trying to understand where her plan had gone so terribly wrong. The day after our wedding, Daniel and I were scheduled for an early flight to Bali, 10 days of honeymoon bliss on white sand beaches far from family drama. But before we left, I knew I needed to tell Daniel the truth. He deserved to know what his mother had tried to do. That morning, as we finished packing our suitcases, I pulled out my laptop and showed him the emails I discovered. I watched his face as he read them, the confusion, the disbelief, and finally, the hurt transforming his features. "I don't understand," he said, his voice hollow. "Why would she do this? Why would she invite Alina to our wedding?" I sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand in mine. "I think she never really accepted that your relationship with Alina was over. Or maybe she never really accepted me." Daniel ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when stressed. "Alina almost destroyed me. Mom knows that. She was there when I was at my worst after the breakup." "Maybe that's exactly why," I suggested gently. "She saw you vulnerable, dependent on her. Maybe she misses that." He was quiet for a long moment, rereading the messages. "You still have time to fix this," he quoted from Janet's email. As if marrying you was something that needed fixing. His jaw tightened. "And Alina actually considered going along with this?" "It seems she had doubts," I pointed out. "But yes, she was willing to entertain the idea." Daniel closed the laptop, his expression resolute. "I'm sorry you had to deal with this alone. I should have seen it coming. Mom's been difficult about our relationship from the beginning." "I handled it," I said simply. He looked at me with new appreciation in his eyes. "Yes, you did. That speech at the reception, I didn't understand it then, but now." He shook his head in amazement. "You managed to call her out without creating a scene or ruining our wedding day. That's impressive." I smiled. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her turn our wedding into a soap opera for her entertainment. "So what now?" Daniel asked. "How do we handle her going forward?" The question was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Not should we confront her? Or how do I fix this? But how do we handle her? Daniel and I were a team now, officially and completely. "We don't," I said calmly. "At least I don't. I'm removing her from my life." Daniel's eyes widened. "You mean cut her off completely?" "She's still my mother, Sophie. And she always will be," I agreed. Your relationship with her is yours to determine. But I won't subject myself to someone who tried to destroy our marriage before it even began. I won't scream at her. I won't engage in a back and forth of accusations and denials. I'm simply stepping away. We discussed it further on the flight to Bali and throughout our honeymoon. By the time we returned, Daniel had reached his own decision. He would maintain limited contact with his mother, but with clear boundaries. And he fully supported my choice to remove Janet from my life. True to my word, I didn't block Janet's number or create a dramatic scene of confrontation. I simply stopped engaging. When she texted, I didn't reply. When she called, I didn't answer. When she sent emails about clearing the air and misunderstandings, I archived them without response. A week after our return, Janet appeared at our door unannounced, a large basket of expensive wines and cheeses in her arms, a peace offering. "Sophie, darling," she began as I opened the door, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We need to talk about what happened. I think you've misunderstood my intentions." I looked at her calmly, no anger or anxiety in my expression.
No, Janet.
I understood perfectly. "If you'd just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted gently. "You tried to sabotage my wedding by inviting Daniel's toxic ex-girlfriend. You lied to me repeatedly. You conspired behind our backs. These aren't actions that require explanation. They're actions that have consequences." Her face flushed. "Now see here. The consequence is this. You're no longer welcome in my life. Daniel will make his own decisions about his relationship with you, but as for me, we're done." I closed the door quietly but firmly, leaving her standing on our porch with her untouched peace offering. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Daniel has established his own boundaries with Janet, meeting her occasionally for lunch, but never in our home. He doesn't share details of our life with her, and he never pressures me to reconcile. Janet sent a formal apology letter after 3 months of silence, a carefully worded note that acknowledged her error in judgment, but still managed to avoid taking full responsibility. I read it once, then filed it away without response. Some might call my approach cold or unforgiving, but I see it differently. By refusing to engage in Janet's drama, by simply removing her from my life rather than fighting with her, I reclaimed my power and my peace. I set a boundary without turning it into another opportunity for manipulation and games. My wedding became not just the beginning of my marriage, but the start of a life lived on my terms, where toxic people don't get unlimited chances to hurt me, where boundaries aren't up for negotiation, and where I can create my own happiness without apology. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply walking away and closing the door behind you, quietly, effectively, permanently.